You are listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my regular weekly guests, and we are all here to share the research, the science, and the strategies, as well as some of the fun, to help you to create a more active life. Welcome to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my guest today, Craig Blain from Move Consulting. So, Craig, quick hello from you and a little bit about you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Craig. I'm director of an organisation called Move Consulting, and we are a physical activity related behaviour change specialist organisation. And what that means basically is we support organisations to apply the theory of behaviour change into that physical activity concept. So how to design more effective programmes that may engage the least active people, and most importantly, how to support them to develop habits to be independently active thereafter.
And that's one of the key things, isn't it? I mean, you've worked with so many different organisations and people, but one of the key things is actually understanding who the inactive person is. Because I think particularly in the field of fitness and health, we have an assumption about who's inactive, and actually a lot of people are way more inactive than we think and we realise, and aren't aware necessarily of the fact that they are very, very inactive. They mistake having a busy life with an active one, and it's difficult sometimes, isn't it, to actually get across this perception of inactivity, if you like. So we're talking about activity a lot, and people who know me will know that activity is one of my things, but why is being physically active so important?
Well, it's been described before as a miracle cure, hasn't it? If we could monetize it or turn it into a pill, everyone will take it. There's no real argument against the concept of. And most recently, one of the kind of most notable phrases or quote that's been used, certainly I've picked it up, is that of Professor Chris Whitty throughout lockdown. There is, to paraphrase, there is no instance, no age, no state where physical activity or taking exercise isn't a good thing. It can benefit essentially anyone and everyone. The problem therein, as you're alluding to there, Sarah, is that we often overcomplicate the idea of what being physically active is, and we think of it as being too formal, too structured. And you can weave physical activity into many, many different parts of your life. And on the grand scheme of things, the reasons why it's important are those wide-ranging benefits that being physically active can bring. It can help you with reducing the likelihood of certain long-term health conditions or managing the side effects and symptoms of those if you are living with. It can improve your mental health and well-being. It can most obviously support you to lead an active lifestyle or to fulfill a filled lifestyle of being able to do things like, for older people, being able to play with and lift your grandchildren as a younger person, to be able to develop those skills to go out and be active in the workplace and take on different professions. So many wide-ranging benefits to it. And it's kind of that question as to why wouldn't you? And as you identify challenges therein, our role and the role of fitness professionals, if we take that market individually, is to find ways to make it fit for people in a way that works for them.
Absolutely. And I think, I've got over 30 years in the good old fitness industry, and, there is such an important place for the gyms, the leisure centres, the classes and things like that. But for an awful lot of people, they are a progression. They're not a starting point, but they're also, if in a way, a bonus. If you have a physically active lifestyle, then they are a bonus, maybe for doing something that's more specific. Whereas it's the everyday activity that's going to get you and keep you active, rather than starting in the gym, maybe twice, 3 times a week, physically active lifestyle, and you just, it's always there, it's always ongoing. You're building those benefits all the time. So I know one of the things we've talked about before is kind of the concept of activity by stealth. So do you want to say a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, well, the Clue is in the name on the tin to a degree. When we hear that phrase, or we've heard it previously about physical activity by stealth, it's about finding ways to build activity into your lifestyle where it's not necessarily recognised, if we can say that. So, as I mentioned before, a lot of people overcomplicate, or a lot of programs overcomplicate this idea of what being physically active means, and we make it too formal and too structured too quickly, if you will. And through the work that we do at Move Consulting, we use a physical activity spectrum to help highlight this concept of where physical activity can come to life. And essentially, the spectrum, if we imagine a line from left to right, on one extreme, there are occupations or work where being physically active could be part of that. So if, for example, you're a labourer or a gardener, or even work in a supermarket stacking shelves, that's a very physically active role compared to, as I am ironically sat down now at a computer. So work can be a place or a way in which activity can be brought into your lifestyle. Moving beyond there, what we find are opportunities to be active. Now, these could be those inopportune moments where it's a last-minute dash for the bus or something like that, where activity happens. So we can't really build an active lifestyle around those instances that just crop up. However, there are opportunities available to us, which 9 times out of 10 are a choice. The example that we often hear is take the stairs instead of the lift, or to use a bus and get off one stop earlier and walk that extra distance if you are able. Then we move into areas of play. Another example here of missing opportunities, if we can call it that, within physical activity is play is not often seen only for children, whereas adult play is a huge opportunity for us to be more physically active, whether that is playing with children and grandchildren or going out and exploring, doing something you haven't done for a long time. That's the adult version of play, if you will. Then we come into these more formal ends of the spectrum that we see more readily, but again, it is more than one homogenous group, if we can call it that. And that end of the spectrum includes exercise or training, whichever term you might use. But again, saying that, I'm sure for a number of listeners, their head will have jumped into that means going to a gym and lifting a heavy weight. It adds to that is recreation, which is playing a sport or an activity purely for fun. And then, as I mentioned, sport is the other end of that spectrum, where that's the formal, more structured end of obviously playing sport in a competitive environment. But all of these 6 different elements, they're all ways in which you can be physically active. So the by stealth element, to a degree, comes in opening people's eyes or broadening that view of where these opportunities lie. And you may, in converse to what you mentioned before, Sarah, be more active than you actually appreciate, or you feel as if your options are limited. So by opening up the view and opening up those avenues of possibility, immediately, straight away, you can support somebody to be more independently active, and again, in a way that works for them, which is the most important thing.
I think I know, a few years back now, but Sustrans did some research into how physically active are you. And a lot of people were doing more activity than they realised, but not necessarily at kind of a brisk pace. And it's, when we say about opportunities to be active, most of us have got way more opportunities to be active in our everyday life than we necessarily realise. I'm one of these people, I rarely use my car. And I certainly wouldn't use my car to go to my local supermarket. It's about 5.5, 6 minute walk at a brisk pace. But my neighbour will only ever drive there. It's kind of, realistically, by the time they've walked to their car, parked a little bit away, walked to their car, got in it, started it up, driven to the supermarket, parked, walked from the car park to the supermarket. By the time they've done all that, it's probably around 5 minutes anyway. And for me, it's an additional, I don't know, probably in total about 10, 15 minutes of activity, but it's additional. And it's something that is now a habit for me. I wouldn't dream of taking the car. There are times I regret it when I've got a massive amount of shopping and I'm lugging it back. But it's looking for those little opportunities, isn't it? But sometimes we're so close to our lives that we can't see them. I'm really interested in what you're saying about play, because you're right. Play is something we think of children doing, go off and play, go out and play. But actually, like you say, it could be doing something new. It could be chucking a frisbee around on the beach. It could be any number of things. But sort of, is there a little bit more on that, opportunities to play that we need to be getting across to our clients?
Yeah, well, in terms of the, as you allude to, the amount of activity and the types of activity that we should be doing, I'm hoping the majority of viewers will have been aware of the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines for physical activity. And essentially, they exist for predominantly every group, if we can call it that, that you may come across. The most recent to be developed were people living with a disability. But if we take as an example the guidelines for adults, essentially what we're suggested with those guidelines is to try and achieve around 150 minutes of moderate activity, or we can half the amount of time and up the intensity. So it's 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous activity in a week. Also within that are 2 exercises or sessions or bouts of strengthening activity to support us in developing and maintaining strength. And then finally, and most importantly at the core of it, is to try and reduce the amount of time that we spend sedentary as well. So that progression that you're speaking about, the first step to the majority of people's cases in looking to be more physically active isn't to just add behaviours on top. It's to look at how active you are at the moment and what that lifestyle kind of plan looks like, and remove sedentary time. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you remove sedentary time and replace it with active time, if we call it that, although you could argue that they are opposites. But things like setting up little mini habits and little triggers that will support that to happen, such as if you watch TV quite a lot and spend a lot of time sitting, then every time there's an advert break or an opportunity, stand up, break that sedentary time up into smaller chunks. If you have stairs in your house and you're able, walk up those stairs, walk back down them before you sit back down again. So immediately you've got more time on your feet, less time sedentary. You will start to see those benefits over time. And it's about building the foundations to stack habits on top of. So play can be just as much in playing with the behaviours that you have and trying to find new routines, as much as it is, again, this kind of formal idea of play where you should be laughing and smiling and having fun. But equally, going out and trying something new, seeing what new skills you could develop for yourself, are that adult version of play, if we can call it that. There's lots of great examples if you go on YouTube and check out different ways to use your environment. That's another brilliant way of exploring how you can bring play into what that could be. So, for example, park spaces, green space is a great place to be active, but park spaces, you can think about different ways to use the park furniture. As an example, swings and benches and flower beds and paths can become little walking or running tracks. It's completely at your pace.
I'm grinning here purely because, many, many years ago when I worked as a personal trainer, I was in London and I used to see a lot of clients in Regent's Park, and they had really well-spaced benches and bins, and I'd use them. I'd say, right, we're gonna jog to that bin, then we're going to walk slowly to the next one, then we're going to do lunge walking to the next one, and then we're going to sprint to the next one. And I'd use the environment in that way, and it was fun. It was fun, and you laugh and you giggle. So again, you could walk briskly between trees and then take big strides for the next block of trees or something. It is, and it's. I mean, anyone who knows me knows that I'm all about bringing the fun back into what you do for activity or exercise, because I think if you enjoy it, you're more likely to do it again and again and again and again, and it becomes a habit, and you get those benefits. And it's like you say, play, fun is such an important part of becoming more active. With regard to the guidelines, they're what people are aiming for. I think people think that the guidelines is where they have to start, whereas actually it's where they're aiming for. And again, that's something we need to be getting across to people, isn't it? How can we stealthily move people to become more active? Because we can't just tell people, we can't just say, you need to be more active, get out there and start moving.
Yeah, so in terms of the work that we do at Move, we use a framework which is derived from some work that a team at University College London, led by Susan Mickey et al., which is called the COM-B model. So they developed a framework which is known as the behaviour change wheel, which essentially uses this model, which I'll explain, to review the effectiveness and efficacy of behaviour change interventions, if you will. But what the COM-B model provides you with is a bit of a framework to guide your reflections. And we've applied this in a number of different ways, from developing strategic approaches, designing interventions, which is its core kind of purpose, if you will, to considerations for your practice. And the COM-B model is an acronym, and C, O, and M lead to the B, which is a behaviour. Now, it's not formulaic, is a key thing to bear in mind here, but C concerns capability. And capability is broken down into some more granular level elements to it. But on the grand scheme of things, what we need to be considering to support people to be more active is their physical capability and their psychological capability. So when we're considering how to support somebody to become more active under their own steam, independently, as we're saying, we need to be building those fundamental building blocks of physical capability. Are they strong enough? Do they have the endurance or the stamina to fulfill this task we're asking them to do? If it's walking to work rather than taking the car, are they physically capable of doing so? Secondly, psychological is, do they have the knowledge and the understanding of how to do it? But equally, can they comprehend that this challenge that we may be setting them is realistic to them? Can they understand how to take that first step towards that full behaviour, if we call it that? So that's capability covered. Then the next part is opportunity, and that's both social opportunity and physical opportunity again. So physical opportunity is that thing reasonably within touch for me. So if it's to start swimming, is there a local leisure centre within a reasonable amount of time? And there's some recent research that's come out about the 15-minute city concept, where we try to understand which amenities should be within 15 minutes of somebody's household. So if, for example, one of those amenities isn't a pool space or some open water, the likelihood is it's going to be quite challenging for people to develop those behaviours because the facility isn't there, the physical opportunity isn't.
That's actually a really important consideration, isn't it? Because there's no point in saying go for a walk in the park if they have to get a bus to the park.
Exactly.
People just won't do it, or a half-hour walk away. So that's a really important thing to consider.
Yeah. And this is why when we look at building opportunities, action plans or goals, however kind of formal or informal we want to make those considerations, it needs to be with the client that we're working with, because that realism, that pragmatism will come from a two-way conversation with them rather than the off-the-shelf, here's your goal and your action plan set for everybody else the same. So but I would like to think that's teaching kind of grand to suck eggs to a degree, and we're all practicing those things, but not to rest on laurels and keep reminding ourselves of the importance of that. But the social opportunity is very much about, do those role models exist within my immediate circle of friends or influencers as an individual? But more than that, are those broader social constructs there? So, for example, for me, I recently joined a new gym, and it's pure gym. And it's probably marketed to a younger audience, if we can call it that. The clientele that go there, not really anybody over the age of 50 or 60 attends because of the way that it's marketed. So again, the social opportunity for older people to join that specific gym environment, as an example, probably isn't there. So it's a bit of a challenge, whereas other settings may be a little bit more suited, or equally not within a leisure or a gym environment. It might be exercising out in green space. And then finally, motivation, which is reflective, being able to weigh up the pros and the cons, and then automatic, those things that you just do without thinking. They're internal or intrinsically motivated, like brushing your teeth in the morning. Most people are intrinsically motivated. It's automatic. You want to do that in the morning. A very strong social construct and habit has been built there. So the COM-B model in relation to physical activity by stealth, they're those fundamental building blocks where we can do some work and develop some skills for individuals or in the design of our interventions, that make physical activity more likely to occur. And again, just as a reminder, C, O, and M, if you have all three or all six, as I've just defined, doesn't necessarily mean that the behaviour will occur. It just heightens the likelihood. And the frame that we use and the drive that we have with all the work is put those building blocks in place so people have the skills and the ability to be independently active.
It comes down to what you're saying. This is an individual process. This is something where we need to be working with our clients individually, not just giving them a cookie cutter approach. And it's my catchphrase. Anyone who's done a course with me knows this. Probably anyone who's listened to any of these episodes will know this by now. But my catchphrase is get to know your client, because too often we make assumptions. We don't dig deep enough. People will say, oh, well, actually, I want to be active because of this or that. We don't dig deep enough and find the real reason. And that's when you find the motivation, isn't it? That's when we rely a lot on reflective motivation. People have weighed out the pros and cons, the do's and the don'ts and the shoulds and the oughts. But somewhere in there is that intrinsic motivation that they may not have uncovered themselves yet, but that often is the key to it. The key to starting and adhering is, I want to do this because actually this is what I want to lift my grandchildren up. I want to go swimming with my friends or whatever. There'll often be, people often focus on the shoulds and the oughts of motivation rather than, I really want this because, and because they don't know. But this is where that get to know your client is so important, because you'll uncover that, and it just makes it so much easier to support their choice to be more active, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And through the training we do to exercise professionals and healthcare professionals alike, the introduction to behaviour change is framed through having a grasp of that model that I just took you through, the COM-B model. And again, a point of reflection, if you will, is not to assume that everybody needs the same. Just as you said, that cookie cutter approach, it's not everybody will need support in all of those 6 areas defined. It might just be one little piece or nudge of information or motivation and support that will take them over the line. And it comes down to a fundamental question of appreciating, and again, another model and another part of the considerations that we make, particularly at Move Consulting, is appreciating that the individual that you're working with, or the individuals that you hope a program that you're designing or an initiative you're designing will attract, they hold the capacity to achieve the change that they wish to. They're the experts in their own lifestyle. They're the experts in their own condition and how they manage that, for example. And if you have that genuine appreciation that they hold that capacity, our role, to a degree, as an individual deliverer, is very much about that mirror on one shoulder to just reflect things back to an individual, and that trampoline on the other to bounce ideas back and forth to come to a solution that works for them. If we go in with the idea of, I have the knowledge and I will fix, or I will do something to you that makes a difference, you'll get so far to a degree, but you'll start to come up against those blockers. It's about unlocking the potential within individuals, absolutely.
It so is, and actually there's a lot of research I've been looking at recently into sort of behaviour change around specific conditions, but one of the issues, one of the barriers, if you like, to becoming more active is a lack of knowledge, not just from the individual's perspective, but from the people they're talking to, sort of the health professionals. And this is where, as fitness, as activity professionals, we've got a really good role that we can find out what the gaps in people's knowledge is or are, and then fill them in with them, but not like you say, not telling them, this is my knowledge, this is why it's good for you. It's helping the person to recognise and to understand why it's good for them, so that it's there, that would help me with, rather than this will help you with. And I think we tell people what we think they should know rather than helping them to learn it.
Yeah. And to be realistic, if we say about it, for those in physical activity roles that are delivering physical activity sessions, whether it be one-to-one or in a group or whatever, there is an element of perceived authority where people turn up and expect to be given a thing. So we do need to temper our approach with a business model to a degree. Give the customer what they want is one way of looking at it. But Phrasing, if we take from the work around motivational interviewing, I really like the way that they frame our approach, if we will, where we should walk alongside people. It's about guiding them there. And there's a learning theory, for want of a better phrase, which is guided discovery, a model of delivery where you offer, it's not about offering options, it's about giving choice. And that's very different. So options is, would you like to do this or this? Choice is, what would you like to do next? And offering that opportunity of this individual that I'm working with or speaking to, they may have some ideas, versus starting with, I know the answer already, here are two limited options that you can take, versus choice is much broader. But as I say, tempering that with, people want to feel as if they get value from it and there's a perceived expertise. They expect you to know. And the most effective deliverers, say this every time when we deliver, the most effective deliverers are the ones that build themselves out of the solution as quickly as possible. And particularly for the likes of personal trainers, there's often a bias and a nervousness over, if I give too many answers away, my client might not come back to me. That's not true. If you give them all the answers so they can do it themselves, they'll come back for the next step along that journey.
Yeah.
And they'll build trust, and you'll have the strongest rapport you ever have had with that approach. But it is tricky. It is tricky.
It is tricky, but it is understanding, at the end of the day, it's their active life, not ours. It's like I always say, as instructors, it's not my workout, it's yours. And years ago, she used to come to a lot of my circuit classes, and then she stopped coming, and I bumped into her, 6 months later or so, and she went bright red, and she was so embarrassed. She said, I'm so sorry, I haven't been to your classes, and it's just I've started going line dancing twice a week, and I absolutely love it, and it's just brilliant. But and I know I wouldn't be able to do it if I hadn't come to your classes first, because they gave me a little bit more confidence to try something new. And I said, that's brilliant, that's absolutely brilliant. I am so glad that coming to my sessions gave you the confidence to go out and do what you want. That's what it's about. I'm here to create independent exercises, or to support people to become independently active, not to rely on me. And I think that's my role, is to encourage activity, not to tie everybody into me so that they can only do it when I'm around. And like you say, it's about, sometimes our role is almost sometimes to build confidence so that they can make a choice, or the level. And we sometimes forget it's people's choice to be active. So let's encourage that and support it, and as I say, get to know our clients so that we can find out how best to support them. So is there anything else you wanted to add? I know the COM-B model is really useful, and there's some really, really good training out there. Does Move Consulting offer some basic training in that?
Yeah, we do. So we have a training arm, which is Move Training, which essentially, a lot of the models and references that I've talked about so far around understanding the theory of behaviour change framed under that COM-B model and how to apply that into your practice. We offer a range of workshops under those different headings. You can find out more about that on our website, which is moveconsulting.co.uk. And in terms of the work that we're doing, we generally are applying those same principles and theories, just utilising them in a different context. So that tends to be more around the work that we'll do with organisations versus individuals or professions, if we can call it that. But again, the website's the best place to go and have a look for them.
I'll pop the link to the website in the notes so that everybody will have that. I'll also pop a link to the guidelines, because I think if people haven't seen the newer ones, it'd be useful for them to know where to find them.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the COM-B model, I've got it up on the shelf here, so I might as well show it to you. It's a useful resource to have. It's kind of one of those things I've always got on the shelf. But this is the Behaviour Change Wheel book. So it goes into a lot more detail than what we've spoken about here, and it's a guide to designing interventions. So if you're in that space of wanting to understand how to develop something that will support sustained long-term behaviour change in a physical activity sphere, you may find some of the theory, if you will, and some of the frameworks that sit within that book. It's a useful read. And as I say, Susan Mickey et al., if you pop links into the chat about that, that's super useful. And equally,
yeah, we'll do.
Part of our role as Move Consulting is to bring that to life and support people in order to hopefully help people to be more physically active.
And that's the aim, isn't it? And what happens once they become more physically active is, again, it's their choice if they want to carry on with everyday activity or move on to more structured opportunities. But we are very much there to support that initial stealthy step into activity. Thank you so much for this. I've got one further question for you, which is, what's your favourite activity and why?
Oh, my favourite activity. So it changes, and it depends on, that's another key to jump back into motivation. At least you can have more than one running at the same time. In the same way, you can have more than one goal, and they change over time. At this point in time, to answer your question, my favourite activity is walking my dogs, just because it's a number of different things that it does for me. But I use it as a little routine. Most mornings, I'll drop the kids off at school, take the dogs for a walk, and it's a time to get out into green space, and I use it to order my day. I kind of go through my mental diary, what am I going to do today? And after it, I know I've ticked the box with being active. I know I'm doing something good for my health, and I'm set for the rest of that day to hopefully have a fulfilled and productive day. So that's my thing, walking the dog.
Excellent. Thank you.
No problem.
Craig, thank you very much for being a guest, and I'll make sure all the links are in the notes so that if people want to contact you or find out more, they are able to. But thank you very much. Thank you for listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my guests. Join me each week for more on how to create and sustain everyday activity, and follow me online at Fitness Career Mentor or Fabulous if you're interested in career development and more on creating active lifestyles.